Welcome to Virtual Exhibitions, Get Inspired. Brought to you by the Digital Empowerment Project, a nationwide initiative organized by the 6 U.S. regional museum associations and dedicated to providing free, self-paced training resources for small museums. Our inaugural series of online training focuses on digital media and technology topics and is made possible by funding for the Institute for Museum and Library Services. My name is Justin Jakovac. I am the Executive Director of the Mountain Plains Museum Association, and I am your host for today's program. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a white middle-aged male. My hair is brown and styled in a side part comb over. I have a mustache and goatee, and I'm wearing a black polo style shirt. In the background, there's a gray wall with a teal poster from a 1982 Smithsonian exhibition opening and an abstract painting that I picked up in the Gambia. In this era of virtual meetings, when digital spaces may substitute for our physical sense of place, it is important to reflect on the land that we each occupy and honor the indigenous people who have called it home. I am speaking to you from my home office in Colorado Springs, Colorado, on the historic homelands of Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute peoples. Wherever we are each located, let us acknowledge indigenous nations as living communities. We at the Digital Empowerment Project recognize that our organizations and those of our members were founded within a colonizing society which perpetuated the exclusions and erasures of many Native peoples throughout the United States and beyond. We ask you to reflect on the place where you reside and work, and to respect the diversity of cultures and experiences that form the richness of our world and our profession. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. Matt Farah is the Associate Curator and Exhibitions Coordinator at the Historic New Orleans Collection. Matt, he began his career at the THNOC in 2010 as a docent and has worked as a cataloger, preparator, reference assistant, and curator of traveling exhibitions. A graduate of Tulane University, his graduate work focused on the political history of the American South. His past exhibitions include From Winfield to Washington, The Life and Career of Huey P. Long, and Merry as the Day is Long, Shakespeare's Hand in New Orleans. Our presenter to follow Matt is Meg Salox, Director of Marketing and Engagement at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, and a nonprofit marketing consultant. She specializes in digital marketing and design affordable, sustainable methods of audience engagement to help organizations grow. Before joining the team at the Maritime Museum in 2019, Meg worked as a consultant helping nonprofits, arts organizations, and museums in Boston, Rhode Island, and Detroit with digital campaigns and audience growth. She was a digital marketing and list manager at Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, where she built an avid local audience of returning subscribers to their evening food history events, signature annual festivals, and Smithsonian Jazz Concert Series. Please welcome our presenters today. Matt, take it away.
I would also like to make a land acknowledgement before we get started. Land acknowledgement is a statement that recognizes indigenous people as the original inhabitants and caretakers of the land and its resources. The relationship between indigenous communities and their traditional lands is one that endures time and change. Most importantly, by making land acknowledgements, we want to help undo the intentional erasure of indigenous people in the historical record. We want to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Homa, Chitimacha, and Choctaw on which the Historic New Orleans Collection expands its learning, working, and living space today. We also acknowledge other indigenous communities whose traditional lands across Louisiana's border, the Tunica, Biloxi, Atacapa, Cherokee, Coushatta, Caddo, Opelousas, and Natchez tribes. By making this land acknowledgement, we hope to express our gratitude and appreciation to those whose homelands we live on today. We also pledge to work to better understand the history that has brought us to these lands and our roles within that history. We will work to amplify indigenous voices and histories throughout our work as educators and historians. Now that we got that taken care of, I'd like to thank all of you for coming here today And we're going to talk about virtual exhibitions at the Historic New Orleans Collection. Just as a quick little bit of context for everybody, the Historic New Orleans Collection is a little bit larger than most museums. We have about 100 employees, and we occupy 3 different campuses inside the French Quarter of New Orleans. Obviously, during the pandemic, we had to change from our physical spaces to a more virtual space. We had a very small scale virtual exhibition program prior to the pandemic. We only had about 6 exhibits done in their entirety, and since then we've expanded greatly. We have 2 major platforms that we use. Now, we use Drupal and Google Arts and Culture. At one point, we had a 360-degree digital exhibition. We're going to get to that in a minute, but we're probably not going to be doing that anymore. It's extremely time intensive. Our virtual exhibit team varies depending from exhibition to exhibition. Different exhibitions require different amounts of input from different departments. Obviously, a more salon-style, gallery-hung art exhibition is a relatively easy thing to transfer from an in-gallery experience to a virtual experience. Your more object-based, text-based exhibits tend to be a little bit more work-intensive. So we have anywhere from 2 to 10 people depending on the exhibit. Now, the platform that we use is a huge, huge determination factor in whether or not you have 2 people working on it or 10, and how much time people need to use to actually do it. The budget considerations that we're going to talk about generally come down to 2 things. It's your platform and your equipment costs and your staff time. The staff time is usually the lion's share of what those budget considerations are. So our first platform that we're going to talk about is Drupal. Drupal is a free open source content management system, and it comes with the standardized page designs that are customizable. You can host all different kinds of media, and what you're going to see on the screen here is the back-end design and then what it actually looks like when you view it on the web. So there's all different manners of text generation that you can do along with adding media. Now, this platform requires technical expertise, coding, and a lot of back-end technical design. That design is something that requires coders. So if you don't have somebody who is capable of doing that on staff or is willing to learn how to do it, then Drupal can be a platform that can be a little bit clunky. It works really, really well for text-heavy exhibitions and exhibitions that require a lot of contextualization for the objects in it. Now, our 360-degree gallery view exhibition that we did was based on the music of New Orleans. Now, these are individual pictures that are actually taken by a digital camera, and then they're spliced together to form an entire virtual surrogate for the gallery itself. Now, as you can see here on the slide, the software investment is about $200, which isn't a lot for, software as it goes, but the technology, the actual hardware for it is pretty expensive. But this is what you actually end up getting. So this is what you'll see on our website if you look at New Orleans Medley. So you can see these small little information tags on the cases on the image there on the left, and that will pull up label text. So the actual label text that you would read in the gallery has a digital surrogate online. You search through this with your mouse, it just spins you around. You can go through the galleries at your own leisure. Now on the right, you'll see 2 tablets sitting on top of that marble table. Now on those tablets, you see something that looks like a globe. Those 2 tablets are jukeboxes that actually have clips of music from different eras in New Orleans. It goes all the way from classical music to modern hip hop and rap. And if you click on those globes, you can see the jukebox itself on your web browser. Google Arts and Culture is the most recent addition to our virtual exhibitions platform suite. I like Google Arts and Culture for more visually captivating shows. So if you have a lot of cool posters, art, large scale objects that can be digitized very easily, this is a really good platform for you. Obviously, you get all of the advantages that Google has. Built-in analytics, it's the largest search engine on the internet. you'll also get a built-in audience that is literally all over the globe. One of the things that is also really nice about Google Arts and Culture is that it integrates seamlessly into all of Google's attendant apps. So if you want to connect something to the map, to YouTube for music, anything like that, it works seamlessly. Now you can see here on the top, that's the actual Google Arts and Culture page for the Historic New Orleans collection. This exhibition that you're looking at was one that we did about films in Louisiana, and this is one of the most famous, an Elvis movie called King Creole. On the bottom, that's our website, and you can see it looks exactly the same. The functionality is the same, and it works really well if you want to promote programming that's an attendant to anything that you have on there. We started doing a watch party movie series during the pandemic where people could log in on Twitter and follow us along with movies that we were showing. We had local experts talk about, sort of fun facts about filming and things like that while we watched the movie together. It was one of our most successful pandemic programs. The next thing that is really important with virtual exhibits is that mobility is extremely important. Being able to look at whatever the virtual exhibit that you have on a mobile device can be a great addition to any exhibition that you have for two reasons. One, obviously you can look at it anywhere you want to, but it can also be used if you allow people back in the galleries. Once we get, hopefully back to the point where we can have everybody in the galleries again, you can actually use this as almost a surrogate for gallery guides. Obviously, it's a little bit different, but you can put more information on a virtual site than sometimes you can fit on a wall. So the one we're looking at right now is called Storyville, about the famous red light district in New Orleans. And this is based on our Drupal platform. So this is what it looks like. Just took screenshots off of my phone, and this is what we're dealing with. Google Arts and Culture has its own dedicated app, and that's what you're looking at here. This exhibition is called Yet She Is Advancing. It's about women's suffrage, and this was the first exhibit that we ever did that was born virtual. It was extremely popular, and our analytics have shown that this is one of the most popular virtual exhibits that we've ever done. So the final tips and takeaways that I'd like you to remember is that you need to tailor your platform to your content. That's really the most important. There are a number of different platforms you can use. I would recommend either Drupal or Google Arts and Culture. They're both free and they have their advantages for different kinds of things. So make sure that the platform fits the exhibit. Highlight your exhibition strengths. Make sure that you make sure to highlight the things that are most captivating about any exhibition. It's similar to any sort of promotional marketing material that you do for an exhibit. The difference is that because it's all online, you need to catch people early and hold their attention. And then finally, make it mobile. Make sure people can see it everywhere. We live in a technology-saturated world, and one of the great things that we can do about this, one of the advantages we have, is that as storytellers, as interpreters of history, we can allow people to actually have some quality content rather than some of the dribble that they watch. This is my contact information if anybody needs to get a hold of me, and I want to thank you all for your time.
Hello, I am Meg Salox. I am the Director of Marketing and Engagement at Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. I am a white woman with shoulder-length curly brown hair and blue eyes, and I am wearing a sleeveless green top and some dangly white fish-shaped earrings. And I am sitting in my home office with some tan walls, and there's a set of French doors behind me. And I'm here to talk today about virtual exhibitions at Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. At Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, we share the history, archaeology, and ecology of Lake Champlain and the Champlain Valley region to empower our visitors and audiences to become stewards of the lake and build a healthy future for our lake and our communities. We are located on the shores of Lake Champlain, surprisingly, outside of Vermont's littlest city, Vergennes, Vermont. We are also located in the homeland of the Abenaki people who've been here since time immemorial and continue to be a thriving Indigenous culture in this region. I would like to acknowledge with gratitude their generations of stewardship from our past, present, and future. Lake Champlain Maritime Museum is a mid-sized Vermont museum with a staff of about 15 year-round employees, and then we expand to 20 to 25 employees during our open season. The museum is actually a 3-acre campus with 18 different buildings and exhibit spaces indoors and outdoors, and including 2 replica boats. We are located in a relatively rural part of Vermont, in a spot where our visitors truly need some form of private transportation to visit us, whether it's car or boat or even plane, as there is a small private airfield across the street. But because of that, and because no one really wants to be on the shores of Lake Champlain in the winter, our exhibits and grounds are only open seasonally from May to October. But we are a year-round museum, which means that we run educational programs year-round on site and at local schools, at peer organizations. And thanks to the internet, we've been doing virtual and digital programs for years, which is what we're going to tackle about a little bit more today. So over the past 5 years, Lake Champlain Maritime Museum has run digital and virtual programs year-round. I've been on the museum's team for about 3 years now. We love exploring and presenting new virtual options because it's a way for us to reach more audiences, present our research and collections in new ways, and really let anyone and everyone enjoy the museum without worrying about the barrier of travel, as that is such a barrier for our location. In addition to virtual exhibits, we've created virtual shipwreck tours, 360-degree gallery tours, we've run virtual camps and webinars, and more. And while the pandemic definitely allowed us to increase our virtual programming, and we have really seen a growing and eager online audience in the past year, which is excellent, it's really affirmed something that we already know that we love, and that we, based on our location, we really need to do to grow our audiences. But we are here today to talk about digital exhibitions specifically. So I wanted to give you some sort of big picture context first about how and why we do these and why we've been doing them for longer before we dive into a specific example. So because of the nature of our space, we have a lot of permanent collections and exhibits on display. We usually do 1 to 2 special or temporary exhibits per year relating to a significant anniversary or an important theme. These could be about women's history, they've been about the history of salmon, they've been about shipbuilding and shipwrecks and everything in between. And since I've been on board for at least the past 3 years, we've always included a virtual exhibit component or a separate virtual exhibit as part of that special annual theme. Why? Well, obviously we love it, if that's not becoming clear, but we've also had a great audience success with these as we expand our exhibits more in the online space. As Matt was also kind of suggesting, as you heard, we found that virtual exhibits it's an opportunity to create an interactive learning space and a content-focused deep dive in a way that we either just can't do because of our physical space or we couldn't afford when we were designing the physical exhibit. And just in general, you have more space and more flexibility online, which we love. We can share those fun, weird stories. We can share more of the research. We can share our full bibliography, which a lot of our historian audiences love. And, I think as Matt brought up in his presentation, we found that by always pairing a virtual exhibit with an on-site experience, it's a great way to encourage further engagement, even with our on-site visitors, by providing that link or that QR code right next to the story or the object or the image that really spoke to them. We can keep them engaged for a moment longer, keep them in our environment. And that for audience members, statistically, that means that they are more likely to remember us, to tell a friend about us, to eventually come back either in person or online, which is great. So we're a small museum. We're in rural Vermont, and we love to do things online, which leads to the question, so how do you do virtual exhibits? And to explain our process, I'm going to use the exhibit that caught some folks' eyes as an example and really is what brought me here today, which is our exhibit Women at the Helm, which was a virtual exhibit that we presented on STORYMAPS. Now, there are a couple of different story maps out in the world today, so I'll specify STORYMAPS that I'm talking about is the storytelling application on the ArcGIS platform that lets authors share maps along with narrative text and multimedia to basically tell a compelling story. It's run by Esri, E-S-R-I, which is a global GIS and mapping technology company. And at quick glance, it's a really beautiful and affordable storytelling solution. You can create really detailed map-based stories, even at their free account level, which is where we started, and we have grown from there. And the museum itself has used STORYMAPS for about 5 years for digital exhibits, for stories, to share the tour of our replica canal schooner when it traveled through the New York State Canal System. It's an app that our team is very familiar with. Women at the Helm, the exhibit itself, is an exhibit that we started work on in 2019 to open in 2020 to celebrate women leaders from the Champlain Valley as a way to mark the centennial of women's suffrage. And we'll dig in this more, but the most important detail to note about this exhibit and why it is such an interesting example in the world of virtual exhibitions is that the platform was selected before we had our exhibit plan, before we'd really started developing the exhibit itself, before we had our narrative or our goals. And that is such an interesting example. And I think based on what we've heard from Matt, you're all probably already thinking, oh gosh, that was not the right call. But it's also a great example because this exhibit is a favorite for a lot of our audiences and a lot of our staff, just for the sheer breadth of information that it contains. But it's an example of a lot of lessons learned and things that we actively do very differently now compared to when we started this project in 2019. So we are going to dig into that. As a way to sort of both explain our process and talk about our lessons learned, I'm just going to talk through the 4 main parts of our virtual exhibit process. First, starting with funding. As I said, most of our virtual exhibits are connected to a larger special annual exhibit, which are always grant funded. And we always include a section, as I've said, for a virtual exhibit component in our grant application. We scope them completely together, the physical and the virtual projects, because a lot of the work for those, the research, the writing, can be done together, or it's the same people that are working on it. And a lot of that grant application is for funding for staff time. The vast majority of it, there's a small fraction that will go towards the materials costs, but we have an amazing on-site production team, so we don't need to budget as much for that. It's more about the staff time. We will not do a digital or physical exhibit if we haven't secured the funding for it, which really affects our timeline. But something that I'm really grateful for and proud of for our organization is over the past 3 years, we've really grown our respect for how much time building a virtual exhibit as well as a physical exhibit takes and the staff expertise that you need for that. So as an example, just for those of you who are thinking about your budget line of, what do I need to accomplish this? About 3 years ago, we were asking for about $3,600 for exhibit design for a small on-site and virtual exhibit. And last year we scoped about $7,500 for a joint digital and physical exhibit experience. Next part is the platform, which I think Matt did a great job sort of talking about the different options and how to think about it. And, as I've said, and I will continue to beat on this drum, historically, when I started at the museum 3 years ago, it was just a part of the grant application process for our exhibits that we were selecting the platform in the grant application, which is how, for the Women at the Helm exhibit, I ended up building it on STORYMAPS. And that was something where the funders were actually very excited to see that. They couldn't wait to see our STORYMAPS exhibit, so we were kind of stuck with it. However, STORYMAPS just wasn't the right application for this experience and this project. So we have learned that lesson big time, and we've changed it up such that when we are writing that grant application, we literally just say that there will be a virtual exhibit or a virtual exhibit experience, and we don't specify anything beyond that because we've built into the exhibit process now that there is time and funding for platform research, scoping, and then decision-making, which I think will also connect well. These all kind of connect together. And surprisingly, staffing, the third part, our exhibit teams, I guess similar to what Matt was saying, it really depends on the size and scope of the project and the exhibit itself. We've had exhibit teams of 3 to 6 people who work together on the full course of the exhibit to agree on the goals, the outcomes, our target audience, as well as the overarching narrative. Our exhibit teams break down between a person doing the research, or 1 to 2 people researching, 1 to 2 people writing, both the script for the physical exhibit as well as the virtual exhibit. 1 person either from our educations or myself from our communications team, just to make sure that we are speaking the right language for our target audience and that we are speaking in words that they understand. And then 1 designer, which has also historically been me, as many of your small museum folks are nodding and recognizing this lifestyle. And then we always have 1 person for the on-site design. So Women at the Helm is an interesting exhibit where we had, I'd say at its peak, we had 3 people working on this full exhibit, the on-site and the virtual experience, where 2 people were really sharing the work of the research and writing, and I was doing the design for both. And I think we all continue to learn this lesson in this industry, but it is always a chance to think about how are we scheduling ourselves, making sure that I was dividing up my time between not doing design for the physical space as well as the virtual space at the same time, because those are apples and oranges. Those are completely different types of design work. And that led us to both think differently about our staffing teams when we were building the project team itself, but also to think about timing, which is the fourth key part of our virtual exhibit and on-site exhibit process. We learned from the women at the HELM, and kind of thanks to the pandemic, that we could research forever. We could research and write forever, and that we really needed to start earlier. And overall, Women at the HELM, we completed over the course of 4 months. We cranked it out. It was a great timeline. I think the end result is beautiful, but we always feel like we could have put in more. So we're giving ourselves as much time as possible, but recognizing that these are annual projects that are approved, and we have to complete them in less than a year. So I've been suggesting this a lot, but I did want to pick it apart because I think this is such an interesting example and will really help those of you who are still deciding on a platform or who might be in my shoes, just how we decided, why didn't this work and why wasn't this the right platform? Women at the HELM, the project itself documents the lives and legacies of 14 different leaders from the 18th century to today, from the Champlain Valley. It's both a great example of a history nerd's dream exhibit, as the virtual experience itself is just packed with information and stories and details and mixed media and archival information. But it's also a great example of some serious lessons that were learned, and the wrong platform choice. And so when I break it down to between the pros and the cons and why I would usually land at this wasn't the right choice, this is really how I shake it out, which is, number one, we made that decision too early. We shouldn't have picked the platform before we knew, as Matt was saying, what was the content, what was the story that we were sharing, and who was the audience. STORYMAPS itself, if you're not picking up on the name, it's just the wrong kind of storytelling. When your exhibit is really about women from the 18th to 19th to 20th century, especially in the 18th to 19th, women weren't really moving around. There wasn't really a lot of map-based movement for us to share. But we did have a lot of information, materials, photographs, archival documents documenting their lives. There was a lot of 2D and text information to communicate their lives, legacies, and impact. Which brings me to, there was a different priority of visuals. STORYMAPS is a map-based platform. It is not something that is made for beautiful visuals and text as, Google Arts and Culture is. It's not an Instagram, it's Google Maps. No, it's not Maps. But if you've ever used a GIS or ESRI mapping application to share information, you know that the more maps you have and the more layers that you add, the longer it takes to load. You're going to need more power to communicate that information, which leads to the fourth main problem that we've had with STORYMAPS in this exhibit, is that it is really slow to load the more information that we packed in. And while I think our curators and writers did their best to come to the best balance of using maps, but also working in the 2D elements, and then that was a design challenge for me. We had a lot of material by the end of this exhibit, and knowing that a lot of our audiences are also located in rural Vermont, we were getting a lot of reports of our exhibit appearing broken online, but it was really truly just that their internet providers couldn't handle the StoryMap application on their browsers. And then finally, I think something that is valuable to bring up, and Matt kind of mentioned this in his, was that because STORYMAPS is a third-party platform, we didn't have a lot of audience tracking information, and I couldn't track audience behavior either. STORYMAPS, the most that they will give you is a full lifetime visitor count that you cannot divide out by month or by day. We can't see any demographics about our viewers, and we can't see their interaction stats. Where are they starting? Where are they leaving? What are they clicking on the most? I will share two sort of fixes that I came up for this last problem, which is that I created a custom link for our exhibit that is connected to our own site and thus connected to our analytics. And that let me track a little bit of the audience behavior, but at the very least, who is coming into this? Where are they located? Are they all new users? Are they repeat people who are coming back again? But really all that was tracking was the people who are entering the exhibit. So I couldn't see anything else beyond that. I don't know what they were doing after that or how long they were staying. And then one other solution to the audience behavior problem that I had noticed was that when we launched this exhibit, we sent it to a batch of our target audience for it, which was educators and historians. We were really hoping that teachers would use this as a tool in classrooms, as a teaching tool, but also to encourage kids to use to research and learn about their local history. And it was also a lot of stories that, local historians were looking for more information about women's history in the Champlain Valley region. So we sent it to them and we invited them to beta test the exhibit. And they were really excited about this opportunity. And this allowed us to discover loading issues. It created a positive, encouraging atmosphere where this target audience felt really welcome to come back to us and share their thoughts, share their questions. And they've caught problems. There's actually been multiple scenarios where I got an email from a teacher who was like, hey, I think your STORYMAPS is down. And we caught a STORYMAPS outage before their team even knew about it. And we were able to elevate it right away. They were able to get it back up and running. And we were able to get that STORYMAPS, the exhibit, back up for the teacher within about 10 minutes. So that was awesome that we were able to open a line of communication that we've never had before. And it was really because I knew that I couldn't track it on STORYMAPS. It was almost like saying to the audience, hey, track this for me. Tell me about it. So that was a nice little silver lining. I will say sort of, to say some cons on the pro side, because I'm not here to just say STORYMAPS is the worst. It's a beautiful application. And it's very affordable. So we don't want to trash it completely. So the things that I liked a lot about STORYMAPS for the Women at the Helm exhibit, they have some great and beautiful layout and formatting options. There's there's a variety of choices, but not too many. So you can really make it work with the content that you have. It is automatically mobile friendly, and this is a newer thing that STORYMAPS has really been working on. If you're familiar with the platform, but we're using it like 3 years ago, it was not mobile friendly. But now their default STORYMAP storytelling application is automatically, they will do a mobile and a desktop version of your story. If you have a map or a GIS or a location-based story, it is perfect for that. It tells beautiful regional map-based stories, either over the course of history or, modern day stories. And it's affordable. I checked and you could build our exhibit using the free account level. You just wouldn't have access to some of the customization features that we had to really align it with our brand. So, that's really where I would shake out, just between the pros and the cons for us. I would summarize to say STORYMAPS wasn't the best application for this exhibit. If I could go back in time, I would honestly sooner design this specific Women at the Helm project on our own. We have a WordPress site at the museum, and we have a lot of built-in just storytelling and visual modules that we've added that are, again, they're free. As long as, it's WordPress, you have to do your research and know what's the right one for you. But this exhibit was really rich in text, delightful deep dives, imagery, and archival material. And I would have wanted to give it a simpler space with less add-ons to really let the content itself shine. And then I would have also had it attached to our Google Analytics, and I would have known way more. But for those of you who are really curious about STORYMAPS, or let's say that you do have a mapping or a location-based story or exhibit that you'd like to share, I did want to share some specific specs about this platform. Or if you've looked at the Women at the Helm exhibit and think that it's beautiful and you want to know more about how we did it, I will share, my interactive and design challenges for this one were based off of knowing our audiences. We have two sort of main exhibit audiences. We have the browser, as I call them, and then the super fans. So I wanted to maintain a beautiful scrolling experience for our browsers so that they still got the main storyline as they just sort of scrolled through on their phone or on their computer. But I also wanted to provide super intense deep dives for those super fans who, are just as much into that research and data and local history as our own researchers are. Seeing how excited my researchers got when they were writing this, I wanted to recreate that moment for our super fans, knowing that they were going to love, diving into that one person story and learning about what it was like to live in a lighthouse. But, knowing myself in a museum, sometimes I just want to skip over that part. So I wanted to create both experiences. And then we also, story-wise, we had to separate in deciding if we wanted to tell these stories chronologically or in a different categorization. One of the main questions that we got when we surveyed audiences was just, what is a leader? So the exhibit itself is actually divided between 3 different types of leaders, and there's an intro section. So how did this translate into STORYMAPS? I will say this was built on our organization account level. But as I said before, you could literally create the exhibit that I made at a free account level. So you just wouldn't be able to like brand your buttons the right color. I used the sidecar story map format that they give you when you open STORYMAPS. You're given a choice of 3 different storytelling slides or cards. So I used the sidecar card. And then I was actually able to insert what STORYMAPS calls express maps into the sidecar slides, which created that deep dive experience, which, you know, I created further by adding only red points on a map. And then we trained, you know, part of the virtual exhibit experience is that people learn that they can click on the red points on a map and it will zoom in and show them more information. Any maps that don't have a red point, you can't click on it. And then the other detail, just, you know, as I was saying, there's 4 different sort of categories to the exhibit. So it's one exhibit, but it is actually 4 separate, completely unique story maps that we then just used a simple drag and drop button feature to create an exhibit navigation at the bottom of each, so that seamlessly for the user's end, it is one linked umbrella exhibit where you go from room to room, if you will. You go from section to section to move from ferry captains to scientists, back to the intro, and back to scientists. So you can move between them, but it is actually 4 completely separate story maps. So that was a lot. In summary, you know, I think my sort of final tips, or the things that I would say if you didn't remember anything else, to reaffirm what Matt said, STORYMAPS, well, it's really about choosing the right platform. And I really like STORYMAPS. It is a really interesting and powerful and affordable platform for digital storytelling, but it is best suited for map-based media. If you have an exhibit that is object or image or text-based, I would not recommend it. You really should choose the right platform based on your exhibit goals, your story, your content, and your audience. If you do end up in my shoes and find yourself stuck using a platform that might not be right, or you weren't really sure, and you're sort of noticing as you go that it's not really right, take note. Start taking notes about why isn't right. Learn those lessons, source target audience feedback, invite people to beta test and find more problems just to affirm what is going wrong here, because that has helped for me, myself, and for our organization, that has helped us make better decisions since then. And for our future, you know, we've already changed up how we plan virtual exhibits in the future. And it creates moments like this where I get to share this with our museum community and say, here's what I've learned. Here's what worked, here's what didn't. And you can really, it's not just about you and your organization learning, it's about helping all of us learn. And finally, I built this exhibit by myself with 2 other people. And then we went and we completed the physical exhibit once we could kind of reopen. So yes, you can do this with a small team. Just give yourself the time and, you know your scope and know your content. But yes, you can do this. And that's it. If you have any questions, or if you just want to ask a lot of STORYMAPS questions, or if in general you just want to talk about digital exhibits, this is my email and my Twitter handle. Those are the best places to reach me. And we also, if you just want to know more about the Museum of Vermont, I would invite you to follow the museum on social media. We do fun things. Thanks so much.
All right. So a note for the audience, during the technical workshop webinars that are going to follow this on the next 3 Thursdays from now, you'll hear more about virtual exhibition platforms and including WordPress. So you can consider a lot of what Matt's already said, but we're going to do a pretty deep dive into a lot of that information over the coming weeks. So thanks for the solid intro to all this, to this topic, guys. All right. First question. My computer, other computer. What have your observations been about the interest of the public generally in the virtual exhibitions you've created? Basically, do you feel it is a good use of a museum's resources to invest in them? And I'll just call on Matt first, because we haven't heard from a couple minutes.
The short answer to that question is yes. We've seen overwhelmingly positive response to this, and it's something that I think we were all quite surprised by. Because we are in the French Quarter, we often associate everything that we do with being, sort of gallery traditional tourist based. And so the idea that people could come to a website, look at exhibitions that, we had adapted to another format would be so popular was very surprising, but it's been great. To the point about whether or not it's a good investment of resources, that really comes to what kind of time your staff has, because these things can be very, very time consuming. And so if you have a really limited, really small staff, especially if they don't have, maybe the most tech savvy nature, then it's probably worth trying to figure out what the best way to employ somebody who is kind of tech savvy to do it. Now, that said, there are plenty of platforms that you don't need it, but I would highly encourage people to explore the world of virtual exhibits. It's certainly something that is not going to stop for us. If anything, it's just going to get more intense.
Nice. Any add on to that, Meg?
I would agree completely. And I would add sort of the further logic step question to Matt's is, do you have the staff time and the resources, and where are your audiences? For us, as I said, it's our audiences, it's a challenge for them to get to us, and we could reach them easier online. So it was worth the staff time to give them an easier way to reach us. Whereas, the French Quarter I haven't been to, but thinking about the cities that I've lived in, those museums, I think they have a lot of people who are walking in, right? So you could wait maybe before you start those online exhibits. So I would add that sort of into your logic matrix.
Super. Other question, do either of your museums do only virtual exhibitions, or do you do a mix of virtual and in-gallery exhibitions in each case? Are there any strictly virtual exhibitions that you all put on, or is there a physical counterpart in each case? I'll ask Meg first. I see you process it.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of exhibits, I think, I've argued strongly that we always pair them with a physical exhibit, just that's how it's most efficient for our staffing and our funding. However, we have done virtual only experiences. I'm thinking about our the virtual shipwreck tours. That was something where I was using old media that we had. We created voiceovers. We brought in diving experts to really create a virtual underwater tour that we never actually planned on doing. So while, yes, you could dive down and recreate that in person, there's so many people that don't scuba that it was really best for that audience. So,
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Matt, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, we've only done one exclusively virtual exhibit, and it was specifically because we were planning on doing a full celebration for women's suffrage, and during 2020, when that was going to open, we couldn't open exhibits. So we sort of had to, here you go, here's that buzzword, we had to pivot and move to an all virtual exhibit. We generally like to pair them. So we don't, in the past, we have never done a virtual exhibit without having a physical in-gallery experience that is attendant to that virtual experience. I don't think that's going to be the case going forward. I think we are going to, I know for a fact, we're going to end up doing a lot of virtual content that doesn't have a physical complement to it. It's not all going to look the same way that our virtual exhibits look now. There's going to be a combination of virtual formats of exhibits, and then either smaller scale or just sort of different kind of programmatic things that are going to be virtual only.
Nice.
I would also, just to add in, I think if the question is, should you do virtual only, there's the next question of, who is it for and what's the goal? And maybe the answer is, yes, you should just put in all of your time to virtual, and maybe it's not an exhibit. Maybe it's a tour, it's an experience. I think there's a lot of questions to ask, and the answer might be yes, virtual only.
Okay, so I've got a couple questions that rolled in for that are targeted towards one or the other. So let me put you on the hot seat here, Matt. Don't you need some pretty skilled developers to work with Drupal? Not cheap if you don't happen to have them on staff. Okay.
Yes, both of those are true. I got a crash course in sort of the back-end design on Drupal very early on in our pandemic exile. And I would not regard myself as being exceptionally tech savvy. I'm a elder millennial, so I have the kind of tech expertise that comes with anybody my age, but it's certainly not exceptional. And we need, Drupal requires people with coding and back-end web page design skills. So, I mean, I don't hate Drupal, but I don't love it. It's very much a means to an end.
Great. Let me. There's one more that came in straight to Matt, so I'll say, to be clear, did you do the watch parties in the Google Arts and Culture platform via an embed in your website?
No, we didn't. So the way the watch parties went, so in the exhibit, if one of the movies that we were showing was going to be part of what we called it #NOLA movie night, then there would be a link to our program page on our website that shows you how to do it. But it gave you all the options for streaming for whatever that film was, and then the Twitter handle for the Twitter page that we had set up for this. So we just used Google as a way to link directly to our site and promote it that way.
Got it. Interesting. Okay, now I got one for Megan here. Next up. We're planning to add technology funding sources on the Museum Learning Hub at some point. We're wondering, where do you seek grant funding for virtual exhibitions? And Matt, feel free to chime in.
Yeah. So for us, a lot of our exhibit funders are local. They're local funding organizations. Some of our best friends, and I will give them a shout out because I know that they just recently got reestablished, is the Champlain Valley National Heritage Partnership and the Lake Champlain Basin Program. So, we've found a lot of success focusing in on peer organizations who have the same priorities and mission-based goals as we do. And I'd say it's similar to federal funding in that they release their NOFOs and we track them, and we are usually ready and we know the application process.
Nice. Any experience there, Matt?
I mean, ours is a little bit, we have a slightly different sort of set of needs when it comes to that, because both of the platforms that we use are free. So there's the cost associated with implementing a virtual exhibit for us is really all tied up into staff time. And because, our staff salaries are sort of set at the beginning of our fiscal year, we don't have to do a lot of funding for that kind of thing. If we had, sort of hosting costs and stuff like that associated with the platforms that we use, then, there really are a lot of opportunities out there to get funding. One thing that I would encourage anybody that's thinking about getting into virtual exhibits to look into, a lot of state agencies will use their accessibility-based grant funding to fund virtual exhibits because they feed directly into accessibility issues. If you have trouble, getting to a museum, getting in, getting around, a museum, anything like that, then this is a way that you can, as a museum professional, you can get your work out there without having to have people come to you.
Sure. Great point. All right. We're talking funding now, I guess, because a couple of these next questions sort of revolve into that. Aside from the grant revenue, what is the funding business case for a virtual exhibit? How do you charge for it, if at all? So I'll shoot that at Meg and just keep tag teaming here.
For sure. I would argue, so we, the museum, just switched to a free admission model, again, recognizing that there are a lot of barriers for people to visit us. So therefore, our virtual exhibits should follow that same model. But something that I've noticed work really well is just building something that is for the right audience and then tracking that audience behavior. And that's why that statistic was so important to me, because then we report that back to our funders and we then use it in future proposals to really show the reach, the audience growth, how many people are coming back, how are we really growing our audience? And we use metrics to track, where does someone start? And then when do they subscribe to our email? And inevitably that person, if they love us and we've treated them in the best way possible, they can become a donor, they can become a member, they'll send their kids to our camps. So it really is about the lifetime value and not just the one time you're checking out a virtual exhibit. But I would say your audience stats are a great way to make that argument without charging for your virtual exhibit.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I would echo that 100%. I think Meg hit the nail on the head. Being able to engage with a community, with a targeted audience is paramount to all of this. That's really the name of the game. We also have a free admission model, but for those of you that don't, there are ways to charge for admission to virtual exhibits that are similar to other kinds of online experiences. If you ever like live streamed a concert or something like that, there are hosting services that allow you to do that kind of thing. I don't know how successful they are because it's a one-time deal and, you know, it's an exhibit, so it's sort of the same kind of thing, but it feels different often for the user because instead of being in a gallery and getting that experience, you're sitting in front of your computer doing it. And that's why it's really important to make sure that whatever you put in your virtual exhibit is really captivating, especially if you're going to charge for it.
Oh, right. And then just on a final note on that, have either of you worked with sponsors in association with the virtual exhibits, say logo placement or acknowledgement type of sponsorship? So I see Meg nodding, so I'll prompt you there.
Definitely. Well, yeah, I think that's an important part of, and granted, you know, we think about who our sponsors are and who we're sending the asks to, but knowing that that's part of the agreement, you know, that there's a value in being listed as a sponsor for an exhibit or having your logo there that is just as much valuable for your funder as it is for your museum. So yes, we share, you know, depending on the level of sponsorship, we will share logos, we'll share their websites, we'll share a shout out. So yeah, I've definitely done sponsorships before, and you know, I'm seeing an increased interest in that, and I think that's partially as we grow in reputation and online standing, as well as just as the world has sort of switched to understanding virtual programs in a whole new way.
Any experience there, Matt?
We haven't, and that's mainly because until this exhibit on suffrage, all of our virtual exhibits were born out of a physical exhibit. So if there was, you know, if we had a sponsor or a partner, we don't usually do sponsorships just because of the, you know, sort of the bureaucratic red tape and some of the pitfalls with that. But we will often partner with people, different organizations, things like that, when we do exhibits. So like, for example, we did an exhibit on sports in New Orleans, and we were lucky enough to partner with the Tulane Athletic Department, the New Orleans Saints, and the Sugar Bowl committee. And so we did a very pared down sort of virtual experience from that. And our sponsors are listed on that, but that's really part of the larger exhibition project as a whole.
Nice. All right. I think we have time for just about one more question, and then we'll do some wrap up comments here. Okay. Is it possible for a single person with no in-house or external help to maintain both physical and virtual exhibits? How have you prioritized or plan to prioritize needs for both? That's what we're talking to a lot of people here that are really a one-person band, if you will, or a two-person band. So what's the feasibility here? And I know, as I say, stay tuned for the next few weeks because we'll be talking more about that. But I'd love to hear what you all have to say. Yeah. Meg?
I would say if you give yourself the time and you've scoped it out and you're not trying to do multiple physical and virtual exhibits, yes, if you know yourself and you know your abilities, you know, if it were just me in a small museum and I knew my exhibits well and I wanted to build a virtual one as well, I believe I could do that. But you need to give yourself the time. I wouldn't try to do that on the same 4-month timeline that we cranked out this one. And then there is upkeep to it. You know, as you're saying, there's maintenance of the physical space in the same way there's maintenance of your virtual space, making sure that everything is working when there is an outage, reporting that. Editing it is the same as editing a physical exhibit. So it's about your timeline and scoping out your priorities, but I would say it's possible.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. I think, you know, again, I think that's perfectly said, Meg. It's really, that is as much a question of what your time allows than it is anything else. Time and expertise, you know, being comfortable with what you can and can't do is really important. But I would, you know, it's always good. I like to encourage people to reach out to younger people who are interested in getting into the museum field, especially when it comes to things that you may not be as comfortable doing. if you could find, somebody around you that's in graduate school that, understands the ins and outs of, how to work on, whatever the platform is. I'll just say Google because it's there and it's very easy and it's very intuitive. It's a really good way to set up an internship, and you can actually work with somebody and, develop that sort of educational component to everything that we do as museum people. The idea is to help educate people. That's really the point. So, you just got to be able to manage your time and be sure to manage your expectations. Know what you're going to have at the end of the day. It needs to be goal oriented. Don't do it just because you think you should do it. Do it because it has a purpose.
Super. Hey, thanks, Matt. And thanks, Meg, for your time today and for being our presenters at the intro to our virtual exhibitions module. I'll give you a couple housekeeping notes on the way out here. Please remember to visit the forum on our website and ask questions. Follow us on social media and stay aware of future programs. Join us for the first technical workshop of this series. It's the Strategies, Project, Workflow, and Efficient Design centered session with Dr. Rene Cepeda. He's an independent art historian and curator from Puebla, Mexico. And again, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.